Hello and welcome to the video Springboot connect to Microsoft SQL database server with me Nam Haming from codejava.net. Through this video I will guide you how to connect to Microsoft SQL server in the Springboot program with JDBC Template and in a Springboot application with Spring Data JPA and Hibernate framework. I suppose that you have these software programs installed on your computer: Java Development Kit, JDK, Spring Tools, IDE, STS, SQL Server Express, and SQL Management Studio. In order to have a Springboot application connect to SQL Server, you need to follow these configuration steps. For the project, you need to declare dependencies for Springboot JDBC in case you just want to use a plain JDBC API, or declare the dependency for Spring Data JPA in case you want to use Spring Data JPA with Hibernate framework. And the most important dependency is SQL Server JDBC driver that allows Java applications to connect to Microsoft SQL database server. And then you need to specify data source properties in the Springboot application configuration file. In my environment, I have an instance of Microsoft SQL database server running on a remote computer. So now I use Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio to connect to that instance. So the server type is database engine. Server name is the host name and slash and then the instance name of SQL Server. And because I'm going to connect remotely, so the authentication type is SQL Server authentication. Login is the username and password. Okay, I connected to that instance of SQL database server, and you can see the database is here, customer tables, and the customers table here in the customer database. I select rows from this customers table. Here you see there are 2 rows in this table, and in the next few minutes I will show you how to code a Springboot program that connects to SQL Server and get the rows from this customers table. This is Spring Tools IDE, and let me create a new Springboot starter project here and name the project as Springboot JDBC Template SQL Server demo connecting to Microsoft SQL Server with JDBC Template. Next, and here you can choose the dependencies for Springboot JDBC. You can expand the SQL node here, and you can see you need to choose the JDBC API to use Springboot JDBC, and for Microsoft SQL Server you need to choose this dependency, Microsoft SQL Server driver, and click next and finish. And we got our Springboot project created here. Open the Maven project file pom.xml, and you can see the dependencies for Springboot starter JDBC and JDBC driver for Microsoft SQL Server here, and Springboot starter that is included by default here. So in order to use connect to SQL Server in a Springboot program, you need to use at least these 2 dependencies: Springboot starter JDBC and Microsoft SQL Server JDBC driver. And next, we need to specify some data source properties in the Springboot application configuration file here, application.properties, to specify the connection information. So the first property we need to specify is the JDBC URL. So the property name is spring dot datasource dot URL here. And for Microsoft SQL Server, the JDBC URL is JDBC SQL Server and then the host name. Host name is in my environment it is SQL Server, and then the instance name SQL expressed by default, and then the database name. I want to connect to the database customer here, so I specify the database name is customer. In case you connect to a local instance of SQL Server, you can change the host name here to localhost. And then you need to specify the username and password. Credentials of SQL Server. Username is SA, and password is my password. So at least you need to specify these three properties: database URL, username, and password. Now I update the code. This is the main class generated when the project was being created here. Springboot application here, and I configure it to be running as the console program. So I have this class implements the command line runner interface and override the run method here. And in order to use JDBC API in this Springboot application, you can declare an instance of JDBC Template here, Jdbc Template, and tell Spring Framework to auto-while this instance. So use a auto-while annotation, and Spring Framework will automatically create a new instance of Jdbc Template, loading the connection based on the properties here. And then in the program here, we can use the Jdbc Template directly. For example, I want to retrieve all the rows in the customers table here. So I can use the first. I need to declare the SQL statement is select asterisk all fields from the table customers JDBC Template, and we can use the method query with two parameters SQL statement and a row mapper here, and I need to create a new entity class customer, and here in the database you can see the customers table has 4 columns: ID, name, email, and age here. So in this entity class, I declare corresponding 4 fields: integer ID, string name, email, and integer age, and generate getter and setter methods for this entity class. Select all, generate, and also generate two string method to print the details of this customer object. Generate. Okay. And then in the main class here, I can use the bin property row mapper class here, new instance for the entity class customer dot class here. So this method will return a collection of customer objects here, customers, and from this list customer I can use lambda expressions for each here to bring the details of each customer object in the collection. So I pass the method in line of the standard output here. Okay, that's very simple. And run this program, run as Java application. This is a Springboot application, and you can see in the control view it prints two customers here. Customer ID1 name Nam Ha Minh, email here, S here, customer ID2 name Ravi Kumar here. Exactly what you see in the management studio here. There are two rows in the customers table here. That means our Springboot application with Jdbc Template is working perfectly. So to connect to Microsoft SQL Server, you just need to declare the dependencies for JDBC and SQL JDBC driver, specify data source properties, and declare a reference to Jdbc Template here. Have Spring Framework auto-write it here, and then you can use the query method to execute a select statement here, and use the bin property row mapper provided by Springboot JDBC API to map the result to a entity class here. Very convenient, right? Next, I will show you how to create a second Springboot project that connects to Microsoft SQL database server using Spring Data JPA and Hibernate framework. So create a new Spring starter project here. The project name is Spring Data JPA SQL Server. Demo connecting to Microsoft SQL Server with Spring Data JPA. Next, and for the dependencies, you need to choose Spring Data JPA and Microsoft SQL Server driver, and click Finish. So here we have the second project being created here. Okay, so I close all the files of the first project and open the Maven project file. Here you can see the dependency for Springboot Starter Data JPA and Microsoft SQL JDBC driver. And you can see the jar files of Spring Framework, Spring Data JPA here, and Microsoft SQL JDBC driver here. And for the data source properties, I can copy from the first project here. Okay, copy and paste to the second project application properties file here. And we are connected to the same database customer. And for the Java code, we will also copy the entity class customer here. Copy and paste here. And for Spring Data JPA with Hibernate, we need to use some annotations to annotate this entity class. The first annotation is entity. entity from the javax.persistent.entity here, and then we need to specify the table name, which is customers. As you can see in the database name is customer, but the table name is customers here. And for the mapping of the primary key column here, we need to use the ID annotation here and specify the generated value annotation. With the strategy is generation type identity to tell Hibernate framework that the values of this primary column or this primary key field are automatically generated by the database. Okay, for the rest fields, they have the same name with the column names in the database, name, email, and age, so we don't need to use any annotations. And for using Spring Data API, we also need to declare the interface for the repository. So create a new Java interface here, customer repository, and have this interface extends the interface JPI repository here, with the type of the entity class is customer, and type of the ID primary column is long. Then in the entity class, we change the data type for the ID is long here. Okay, very simple. And then we update the main class here. Springboot application here implements the command line runner, so it will be running as the standalone console program. Implements command line runner, and implement the run method here. And in order to use Spring Data API, we need to declare a reference to a repository here, customer repository, customer report here, and annotated this field is annotated using the auto-y annotation here. And then in the run method, we can use the customer repo directory like this. File R here, and it returns the collection here, customers. And we will also use the for each method here with a lambda expression for the system.out.println here to bring the detail of each customer object in the collection. That's it, very simple. Now let me run this Springboot application with Spring Data API to connect to Microsoft SQL Database Server. Run as Java application. And you can see it prints the two customer objects here, ID1, ID2, name Namabing and name Ravi Kumar here. Perfect, right? And in the console view, in the login information, you can see Spring Data Repository, Spring Data Repository initialized. Here with Hibernate framework, as you can see, Hibernate by default using the dialect class for SQL Server version 2012 here. As you can see Hibernate ORM core version 5.4.23.50 here. And besides the required properties URL, username, and password, you can also specify some additional properties, for example, to show the SQL statements. Spring.jpa.show SQL equal true here. Then it will print the SQL statements in the console. Now let me run this program again. Okay, and you can see it prints the SQL select statement here. Select column names from the customer table here. You see customers here, and you can also specify another property spring.jpa properties Hibernate dot format SQL equal true to tell Hibernate framework to format the SQL statements printed in the console here, and run the program again. And you can see the SQL select statement is formatted nicely, right? And for the database dialect, if you don't want to use the default, you can see the default dialect class here. You can specify the custom the specific dialect class here. For example, spring.jpa.properties Hibernate here .dialect, and specify a specific dialect class. You can find the dialect class supported by Hibernate by looking at the Hibernate core Java file here. You see Hibernate .hibernate.dialect. Here you can see, and you can see the supported classes for Microsoft SQL Server here. SQL Server 2005, 2008, 2012 here. For example, I want to use the dialect class for SQL Server 2008 dialect, and I'll run the program again. Something wrong. SQL Server 2008 dialect. We need to specify the fully qualified name of the dialect class, and run again. Okay, and you can see Hibernate we use the specified dialect class here, SQL Server 2008 dialect here. And as you can notice that when using Spring Data API, the program has not terminated here. We need to manually click the terminate button here to terminate that instance of the program. So because Spring Data API manages the connections, database connections automatically. So in this kind of console program, you need to exit the program. In a web application, you don't need system exit 0 here. So far, you have learned how to connect to Microsoft SQL database server in a Springboot application. I hope you will find this video helpful. Please subscribe to my channel, like, comment, and share this video. Thanks for watching.